Why Q never appeared in a Star Trek TNG movie. The omnipotent trickster Q, brilliantly portrayed by John D. Lancey, was a defining force in Star Trek: The Next Generation TNG. Introduced in the pilot episode Encounter at Farpoint, Q served as both a cosmic antagonist and a narrative device, challenging Captain Jean-Luc Picard and his crew with philosophical dilemmas and moral tests. He was powerful, unpredictable, and immensely entertaining, an audience favorite who returned throughout TNG, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. Yet, when the time came for TNG to transition to the big screen, Q was conspicuously absent from all four films: Generations, First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis. This omission has puzzled fans for decades. Why was such a pivotal character left behind in television space while others, like the Borg, Data, or even the Nexus, made their cinematic debuts? The answer lies in a combination of creative direction, tonal considerations, and the complex nature of Q himself. The tone of the movies didn't suit Q. One of the simplest explanations is tonal consistency. The TNG films were designed to be more grounded and cinematic than the episodic structure of the television series, where the show could accommodate a flamboyant god being like Q appearing to teach moral lessons or throw the crew into bizarre alternate realities. The movies generally leaned toward darker, action-driven narratives. Generations dealt with grief and mortality, focusing on Picard's loss and Kirk's legacy. First Contact was an intense sci-fi thriller, more akin to a war film, pitting the crew against their deadliest enemy, the Borg. Insurrection was a philosophical parable but still restrained in tone, emphasizing political intrigue. Nemesis was a grim, brooding send-off that dwelled on identity and sacrifice. Q's signature blend of sarcasm, whimsy, and theatricality may have clashed with the serious, often somber moods of these films. Including Q would have risked breaking the immersive realism that the filmmakers were aiming for, an unfortunate side effect of trying to distance the movies from the perceived camp of television sci-fi. Q's role was more philosophical than plot-driven. Q didn't just appear to create conflict. His real purpose was to provoke thought and evolution. In Encounter at Farpoint, he put humanity on trial. In Tapestry, he offered Picard a chance to relive a pivotal moment in his life. In All Good Things, the series finale, Q revealed that the trial had never ended, that the true test of humanity was ongoing. These stories were rich in character exploration and philosophical weight, but lacked traditional action movie structure. That's part of what made Q compelling on television. He wasn't a villain to be defeated, but a force to be understood or endured. Hollywood blockbusters, especially during the 1990s and early 2000s, typically demanded a more conventional antagonist. The threat needed to be physical and resolvable. The Borg Queen had to be destroyed, Shinzen had to be stopped, and the malfunctioning Baku metaphasic collector had to be sabotaged. Q, being omnipotent and largely untouchable, doesn't fit neatly into that mold. The writers had trouble containing Q. Several TNG movie writers and producers, including Ronald D. Moore and Brannon Braga, have commented that Q was discussed during the early stages of film development, especially for Generations and Insurrection. However, they found it difficult to contain Q in a movie's 2-hour format without reducing his impact. Q worked best in episodes where his motivations were slowly revealed and his challenges unfolded gradually, giving the crew time to react and reflect. Condensing that complexity into a fast-paced film script without either trivializing Q or dragging down the narrative was a daunting task. There's also the risk that a movie might turn into The Q Show. John D. Lancey's performance was so magnetic and scene-stealing that he could easily outshine the ensemble cast, which the films were designed to showcase. A movie about Q might quickly become more about Q than Picard or the Enterprise, shifting the focus away from the themes the writers wanted to explore. They didn't want to repeat All Good Things. TNG's final episode, All Good Things, is widely considered one of the best series finales in television history. It wrapped up the show's narrative with sophistication, heart, and importantly, Q. His final line to Picard, "See you out there," was a perfect send-off. Many involved in the production felt that Q's arc ended there in a satisfying and poetic way. Including him in a subsequent movie would have risked diminishing that final interaction. If Q were to appear in a TNG movie, it would have needed to be more than a cameo or comic relief. It would need to offer something new, something deeper than the trial of humanity. But that theme had already been thoroughly explored. There's also a meta-narrative to consider. All Good Things was itself more cinematic in structure than some of the actual films. In many ways, it was the Q movie. Trying to top that with a theatrical entry might have felt redundant or risky. Studio interference and commercial concerns, Paramount had very specific expectations for Star Trek movies. With Generations, they wanted a passing of the torch between Kirk and Picard. With First Contact, they aimed for an action-heavy thriller. With Insurrection, they hoped for a lighter tone akin to Star Trek IV. And with Nemesis, they wanted a darker film that could potentially reboot the franchise. In all of these, studio executives prioritized accessibility for general audiences. Q, with his deep continuity ties and abstract narrative function, might have been seen as a liability. Studios may have worried that casual viewers unfamiliar with TNG would find Q confusing, especially if his character wasn't carefully reintroduced. It's telling that none of the movies relied heavily on long-running series elements, save for the Borg and First Contact, a villain who was already highly recognizable and could be simplified into a visual menace. Q, by contrast, required exposition, nuance, and backstory. That didn't fit neatly into a blockbuster marketing plan. Missed opportunities and what could have been. While there are understandable reasons Q never appeared in the TNG films, that hasn't stopped fans from imagining what could have been. A Q-focused Insurrection might have used his powers to explore the ethics of immortality or force the crew into a philosophical dilemma that mirrored the Baku situation. A Q appearance in Nemesis could have worked as a framing device, with Q warning Picard of the dangers of facing his darker self. A standalone Q movie, where Q brings Picard into an alternate timeline or metaphysical realm, could have acted as a sort of postscript to the series, more contemplative and less action-oriented. Even a comedic interlude in First Contact, perhaps Q mocking the Borg or appearing in the past, could have offered a lighter moment in an otherwise intense story. Ultimately, none of these came to pass. But the idea of a Q movie remains an intriguing what-if in Star Trek history. Legacy and return in Picard. Though Q never graced the silver screen, his legacy remained strong. When John de Lancey reprised his role in Star Trek, Picard Season 2, it was a nostalgic and emotional return. Older, wiser, and more introspective, this version of Q brought emotional closure to his relationship with Picard. In doing so, Picard gave fans something the movies never could, a final farewell worthy of their shared journey. It also confirmed what fans had long suspected, that Q wasn't just a mischievous god. He was a mirror for